The Ghastly Journal. Introduction. The wind howls outside as we welcome you back to the Ghastly Journal, the place where we drag history's darkest secrets from the depths into the cold light of the present. Tonight, our journey takes us into the rain-swept moors of Northumberland to a sprawling stone manor that has stood in defiance of centuries, yet could never defy the fate that stalks those who live within its walls. This is no ordinary haunting, no fleeting tale of spectral figures or creaking doors. What we bring to you is a meticulously documented pattern of death stretching across more than 3 centuries, one that has claimed the lives of children with a precision so unerring it shatters any illusion of coincidence. The name of the family is Corbyn, and for over 300 years, their firstborn child has died on the night of their 7th birthday. Not a day before. Not a day after. The rules of this fatal ritual have never changed, and the grim tableau in which each child is found has repeated without variation since the year 1678. Locals speak the family's name with hushed voices, some making the sign of the cross, others avoiding the subject entirely. Superstition clings to this story, yes, but so does evidence. Medical records, testimonies, newspaper clippings yellowed by time. The deeper you look, the harder it becomes to dismiss this as mere folklore. And tonight, we will not only tell you the history of the Corbyn curse, but also follow the thread from its origins in an ancient temple on the other side of the world, through the grief of generations, into the laboratories of modern science. We will examine failed attempts to stop it from exorcisms to genetic research, and we will ask the question no Corbyn wants to hear out loud. Is there truly no escape, or does some path remain hidden in shadow, waiting for the right mind or the right sacrifice to uncover it? Setting the scene. Corbin Manor. Imagine a building so entrenched in its own legend that even the wind seems reluctant to touch it. Corbin Manor rises out of the Northumberland landscape like the back of some ancient sleeping beast. Its grey stone facade is worn smooth in places by centuries of rain, but its edges are still sharp, like the jawbones of a predator. Moss climbs the walls in irregular patterns, filling the cracks between stones like veins. The manor sits apart from the nearest village, separated by open moorland where mist creeps low and slow. For the locals, this isolation is both a physical and spiritual boundary. They will not go near the house. They will not speak the name Corbyn unless necessity demands it. In the old days, children were warned to stay away from its gates, and those who ignored the warning often claimed to feel an oppressive weight in the air long before they reached the front steps. On stormy nights, the house is said to come alive, not in the way a home becomes lively with people, but in the way a wounded animal might stir under threat. The wind pushes rain against the leaded glass windows, rattling the frames as if trying to find a way inside. From the road, the silhouette of the manor seems to lean slightly toward you, as though it has noticed you, as though it is listening. It is here in this place of stone and shadow that the Corbyn story has unfolded, generation after generation. The walls have seen more death than joy, more funerals than weddings. And yet the family always returns, as if bound by a chain. No one can see a chain forged in 1686, when Thomas Corbyn first laid eyes on the land and decided it would be his, the pattern of death. The Corbyn curse is as precise as it is merciless. Every firstborn child dies on the night of their 7th birthday. The cause of death is always listed the same way: cardiac arrest. But no autopsy has ever found a physical reason for the heart to fail. No bruises, No signs of suffocation, no poisons in the blood, and yet the position in which the bodies are found is identical every single time, face down on the floor, arms outstretched, as though reaching for something or someone just out of sight. The detail that chills most is not the stillness of the bodies, but the faces. Each one is frozen in an expression of such profound terror that witnesses often refuse to describe it in detail. This pattern has remained unbroken for over 300 years. It has occurred in candle-lit bedchambers, in boarding schools, in hospital wards, even in air raid shelters during the Blitz. It has struck in England and Scotland, in the United States, in New Zealand. The geography changes, the decor of the room changes, the technology changes, but the tableau never does. Medical experts over the centuries have tried to rationalize it as congenital heart defects, as undetected seizures, as night terrors gone fatally wrong. Yet no explanation accounts for the precision of the timing, the uniformity of the posture, or the haunting familiarity of the expression that every Corbyn parent comes to dread. The first questions: what force could stalk a bloodline with such single-minded purpose? Why 7 years? Why the firstborn? These are the questions that have haunted not only the Corbyns themselves, but every researcher, doctor, priest and historian who has brushed against the edges of this mystery. Folklore is full of bargains made and debts to be paid, of pacts signed in moments of desperation and upheld long after the original deal-maker has turned to dust. Is that what happened here? Did some ancestor trade the life of his descendants for wealth or protection, or does the answer lie in something older than humanity's idea of devils and saints? A force that predates our words for good and evil, operating by rules we cannot begin to understand. It is this uncertainty that has kept the Corbyn curse alive, not only in their blood, but in public imagination. Theories abound, but facts are few. Yet the historical record offers one place to start the life and choices of the man who brought the Corbyn name to Northumberland. Thomas Corbyn's return from the East Indies, 1677. In the winter of 1677, Thomas Corbyn returned to England from the East Indies with more than just a merchant's fortune. He had spent years sailing between India, the Orient, and the Spice Islands, amassing not only goods, but a personal collection of artifacts unlike anything seen in his homeland. Among his acquisitions were rare books bound in unfamiliar leather, strange metal implements whose purposes were unclear, and statues carved from stones that shimmered oddly in candlelight. Some he purchased openly. Others, according to whispers in shipping circles, were taken from places where Westerners were neither welcomed nor permitted. Thomas was a man described by contemporaries as pragmatic to the point of ruthlessness in business, but privately fascinated by the esoteric. His ledger books showed precision and profit. His private journals hinted at a restless mind hungry for forbidden knowledge. With his new wealth, he purchased the estate that would become known as Corbin Manor, along with the surrounding lands. Locals noted his arrival with curiosity. Here was a man who had been to places they could scarcely imagine, who spoke of truths that lay outside the teachings of the church, who seemed to watch the night sky with more interest than the ground beneath his feet. Within a year of his arrival, he would marry Elizabeth Hale, the daughter of a neighboring landowner, and set into motion a chain of events that neither he nor anyone else could ever reverse. For it was not only wealth that Thomas Corbyn had brought back from his travels, but something far darker, something that even now may be watching from the shadows of the manor's crumbling halls. Marriage to Elizabeth Hale and the birth of Jonathan, 1678. The spring of 1608 brought colour back to the hills of Northumberland, and with it the marriage of Thomas Corbin and Elizabeth Hale. It was, at least in outward appearance, a union of power and promise. Elizabeth was known in the county for her beauty and her quiet grace, the only daughter of a respected landowner whose holdings bordered the Corbin estate. She brought a dowry rich in land and livestock. Thomas brought his fortune from the East Indies and a reputation as a man of means and vision. The wedding was a grand affair, guests traveling from as far as Newcastle to witness the celebration at Corbin Manor. Local gossip painted the picture of a perfect beginning. Few suspected that within a decade Elizabeth's name would be spoken only in whispers. That same year, on Midsummer's Eve, the first heir to the new Corbin line was born, Jonathan. His arrival was marked with a celebration that spilled into the early hours, the great hall of the manor filled with laughter, candlelight, and music. Thomas reportedly spared no expense, sending servants into town for the finest wines and instructing his kitchen to prepare exotic dishes inspired by his travels. The birth of Jonathan seemed to cement the Corbin name in Northumberland society. A line secured a legacy assured. In those first years, nothing seemed amiss. Jonathan grew into a lively child, quick to smile and quicker still to learn. His mother doted on him, and even Thomas, often more consumed with his private library and strange acquisitions, was said to light up in the boy's presence. The estate prospered, the family thrived, and if any shadow lingered over the manor, it was invisible to those living within. But in the background, Thomas continued his studies in the occult, adding to his collection of artifacts and books and occasionally disappearing for days into the locked upper rooms. Elizabeth, though uneasy, accepted his eccentricities as part of the man she had married. No one could have guessed that the joy of Jonathan's birth would serve only as the prologue to a tragedy that would echo through the centuries, a tragedy that would make his name the first in a long and unbroken list of the Corbin dead. The death of Jonathan, 1685. On the night of Jonathan's 7th birthday, a storm unlike any in recent memory swept across the moors. Rain lashed the windows of Corbin Manor, and thunder rolled in great earth-shaking waves. Inside, the household had gone to bed after a modest celebration. Jonathan had spent the day with his parents, opening gifts and eating a cake his mother had baked herself. Servants later recalled that he had seemed unusually quiet that evening, glancing often toward the windows as though listening for something beyond the sound of the storm. Sometime after midnight, those in the servants' quarters reported hearing noises from the boys' room, not the frightened cries of a child, but the soft cadence of whispers, as if Jonathan were speaking to someone just out of sight. No one entered his chamber until dawn. When his nurse finally pushed open the door, she found him lying face down on the floor beside his bed, arms stretched outward, palms flat against the boards. His small body was cold. His eyes were open, wide pupils dilated in a way the attending physician would later describe as the most profound terror I have witnessed in my 40 years of practice. There were no marks, no signs of struggle. His heart had simply stopped. The household was thrown into chaos. Elizabeth collapsed inconsolable, while Thomas retreated into his private rooms, refusing food or company for days. The whispers of that night would become the first entry in a grim family record, an event so strange and specific that its echoes would be recognized again and again in the years to come. Thomas's descent into occult studies. Grief transformed Thomas Corbin. In the weeks following Jonathan's death, he became a ghost of himself, moving through the halls of the manor in silence, speaking only when necessary. His dealings in business slowed to a crawl. Visitors who once found him a shrewd but cordial host now described him as distracted, distant, and hollow-eyed. The only room where he seemed animated was his library, a sprawling, high-ceilinged chamber filled with the artifacts and manuscripts he had collected during his voyages. Servants whispered about strange smells drifting from beneath the library door. Acrid smoke, unfamiliar resins, the metallic tang of heated brass. On certain nights, low murmurs in foreign tongues could be heard, accompanied by the faint scratching of quills and the rhythmic tapping of objects against wood. Thomas ordered the household staff to avoid the room entirely and dismissed any servant who dared to question his work. Elizabeth, unable to bear the isolation and the constant presence of her husband's strange pursuits, began to withdraw. Friends tried to visit, but she declined company, claiming exhaustion and illness. 6 months after Jonathan's death, she took her own life. The manor was silent for days after her burial, save for the sounds coming from the library, scraping, shuffling, and the occasional slam of a heavy book. Those who remained in service swore that Thomas had buried himself in work, not to distract from his grief, but to find answers. Whatever had taken his son, he seemed determined to understand it, or perhaps to control it. Second marriage, Sarah Winchester, in the birth of Richard, 1685. 5 years after the twin tragedies of losing his son and wife, Thomas remarried. His new bride, Sarah Winchester, was 20 years his junior, the daughter of a wealthy wine merchant from York. She brought with her a vitality and ambition that briefly seemed to lighten the oppressive atmosphere of Corbin Manor. For a time, the household appeared to return to some semblance of normalcy. Sarah gave birth to a son, Richard, in 1685, the new heir to the Corbyn estate. But the memory of Jonathan's death was never far from Thomas's mind. As Richard's 7th birthday approached, his father's anxiety became visible to all. He hired guards to patrol the manor's halls through the night. He consulted with clergymen from both the Church of England and Catholic orders, seeking blessings and protection rituals. Servants reported seeing chalk marks drawn on thresholds and doors, strange symbols etched into the floorboards near Richard's room. In the weeks leading up to the boy's birthday, Sarah grew uneasy with Thomas's behavior. She questioned the necessity of the guards, the secrecy of his meetings with visiting priests, and the sleepless nights he spent locked in the library. But she could not deny the change in the air, a sense that something was coming, and that her husband feared it more than he feared losing face. The death of Richard, 1692. On the morning after Richard's 7th birthday, the pattern repeated with a cruel and surgical precision. The guards posted outside his room swore they had heard nothing unusual during the night. No footsteps, no voices, no movement beyond the normal shifts of a sleeping child. Yet when they entered at dawn, they found the boy on the floor beside his bed, face down, arms stretched wide, his small fingers curled as though grasping at something just out of reach. His eyes were open, his mouth slightly parted in an expression so raw with terror that one of the guards fled the room and refused to return. The physician who examined him declared the cause of death as sudden cardiac arrest, though he could offer no explanation for how a healthy child could die so abruptly, nor why his body bore no mark of harm. This was no longer a single tragedy, no longer something that could be explained away by bad luck or illness. 2 sons, 2 deaths, 2 identical scenes spaced exactly 7 years apart. In the Manor's upper library, Thomas Corbin pored over his occult texts with renewed obsession, the desperation in his eyes matching the hollow weight in his voice. Whatever had come for Jonathan had returned, and Thomas knew it would come again. William survives. The exception to the rule. When Thomas Corbyn died in 1696, the estate passed not to a firstborn, but to his 3rd child, William. William's survival was at the time taken as proof that whatever plagued the family targeted only the firstborn heir. He had been a boy of 9 when Richard died, and had lived well past the cursed age of 7 without incident. This anomaly gave the Corbyns something they hadn't felt in decades: hope. William inherited not just the manor, but also the weight of the family's losses. Though he had escaped the fate of his brothers, he was haunted by their absence and by the whispers surrounding the manor. Neighbors kept their distance, marriage proposals were cautious, and even loyal servants carried a lingering unease about the house and its history. Despite these shadows, William sought to rebuild the family's reputation. He modernized parts of the estate, expanded the agricultural lands, and tried to forge new alliances through marriage. When he wed a young woman named Margaret Hollis, there was an unspoken understanding between them they would defy the curse by raising a healthy family, and perhaps in doing so, they could bury the legend for good. Their first child, a daughter named Mary, was born in 1705. As her 7th birthday approached in 1712, William remained confident. He had survived. Perhaps Mary would too. But as the date drew nearer, unease crept into the household. The staff whispered. Servants lit candles in the chapel at night. William himself began waking in the small hours, listening for the sound of whispers outside his daughter's room. What happened on the night of Mary's 7th birthday would prove that his survival had not broken. The curse only delayed it. The death of Mary, 1712. Mary Corbyn was found in the same position as her uncles, before her face-down arms outstretched, her expression fixed in a mask of terror. The discovery shattered William's belief that his survival had been the end of the pattern. Worse still, it proved that the curse did not discriminate by gender. Firstborn sons and daughters alike were marked for death. The physician who examined her could find no cause, and once again, the verdict was sudden cardiac arrest. This repetition across 3 separate children over decades was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Word of the death spread quickly through the surrounding countryside. Families who had once cautiously interacted with the Corbyns now avoided them entirely. Even clergy grew reluctant to step foot in the manor, muttering about a spiritual taint that could not be cleansed. The legend of the Corbyn curse grew stronger. Folklore began to take shape, layering the story with speculations that a witch had cursed Thomas Corbyn for stealing sacred relics from a temple, that a demon demanded tribute for the family's wealth, or that the land itself rejected the bloodline. In taverns, the tale became a warning to outsiders: never marry into the Corbyn family, for the curse spares no one. For William, Mary's death marked the end of his attempts to rebuild the family standing. He retreated from public life, letting the estate fall into quiet neglect. The manor, once a place of ambition, returned to its role as a silent witness to loss. local folklore, and dark theories. By the mid-18th century, the Corbyn curse had woven itself deeply into local legend. Oral histories from the surrounding villages tell of warnings passed from parent to child: never approach the manor on moonless nights, never look directly into the upstairs windows, and never under any circumstance say the name Corbyn after dark. Among the theories that persisted, 3 stood out as the most widely believed. The first was the witch's curse theory that Thomas Corbyn, during his travels in the East, had wronged a powerful sorceress who exacted vengeance through his bloodline. The second was the demonic pact theory that Thomas had willingly offered the lives of his firstborn children in exchange for wealth and prosperity. The third was the ancient land spirit theory that long before the Corbyns arrived, the land on which the manor stood had been claimed by a spirit or entity that demanded ritual sacrifice. While each theory differed in detail, all agreed on one point: the deaths were not random. Something intelligent was orchestrating them. The precision of the curse, the age, the timing, the identical posture of the bodies was not the work of chance. To the locals, this was proof that the Corbyns were marked, and nothing could erase that mark. This collective belief created an invisible barrier around the family. Marriages into the Corbyns became rare. Friendships with them were cautious and distant. And while the wealth of the estate ensured the family's survival, it also trapped them in isolation, a gilded cage under an unbreakable shadow. The failed exorcism of Father Ambrose Blackwood, 1724. In 1724, after yet another firstborn Corbyn child died under the same mysterious circumstances, the family sought the aid of the church. Father Ambrose Blackwood, a respected priest from St. Michael's Church, agreed to perform an exorcism on Corbin Manor. His written accounts, preserved in parish records, offer a chilling glimpse into what happened that night. Blackwood described the atmosphere inside the manor as oppressive in a manner that defied the senses. The air felt thick, heavy, almost difficult to breathe. As he moved from room to room, he heard faint whispers in an unknown language. The closer he came to the East Wing home to Thomas Corbyn's old library, the colder the air became, and the candles guttered as if in protest. During the ritual, the whispers grew louder, and shadows seemed to move independently of the light. Blackwood noted that the language was guttural, older than any tongue he recognized. At the height of the exorcism, he collapsed, suffering a stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak for the rest of his life. The ritual was abandoned, the priest removed from the manor, and no clergy ever again attempted such a rite within those walls. For the Corbyns, the failure was a devastating confirmation the church could not protect them. For the surrounding community, it was proof that the curse was stronger than holy intervention. The death toll continued and the isolation deepened. The Corbyns become social pariahs. By the mid-18th century, the Corbyns' notoriety had spread beyond Northumberland. In wealthy circles across England, their name became synonymous with tragedy. Potential marriage alliances dissolved the moment the curse was mentioned. Invitations to social gatherings became scarce, and those who did attend functions often found themselves whispered about or avoided. Even among the gentry, where superstition was often disguised beneath a veneer of reason, the Corbyns were treated as if they carried a contagious disease. No one wanted to risk their lineage becoming entangled with a family that could not keep its firstborn alive past the age of 7. The estate's wealth, once a lure for potential alliances, became irrelevant in the face of this generational doom. Inside the manor, life narrowed to the family itself, and a skeleton staff of servants, many of them from families who had served the Corbyns for generations, bound by loyalty or lack of other prospects. The great halls stood silent most days the gardens overgrew, and dust settled in the unused rooms. The curse had not only taken lives, it had stripped the family of any meaningful connection to the world beyond their gates. Yet the Corbyns did not abandon their home. Whether out of pride, fear, or the belief that leaving would only make things worse, they remained in the manor's shadow. The world outside changed, empires rose and fell, but inside Corbin Manor, time seemed frozen, marked only by the slow, steady tolling toward the next 7th birthday, the scientific vigil of Charles Corbyn, 1783. 1783, Charles Corbyn, an educated man of the Enlightenment and a firm believer in reason, decided he would be the one to break the family's curse. A physician by training and a skeptic by nature, he dismissed the tales of witches and demons as relics of a superstitious past. When his firstborn son Edward approached his 7th birthday, Charles prepared for the night with methodical precision. The boy's bedroom was transformed into a controlled environment. Dozens of candles lined the walls to eliminate shadows, while 4 esteemed physicians from London and Edinburgh stood watch at the bedside. The windows were latched, the doors locked, and Charles himself stationed at the only entrance with a loaded pistol at his side. Guards patrolled the corridor outside, instructed to respond to the slightest disturbance. For most of the night, Edward slept peacefully. The physicians made regular notes. Temperature, respiration, heartbeat, all normal. But as midnight passed, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A sudden, unnatural chill spread, prickling the skin of every man present. The candles dimmed, though no draft was detected. Edward began murmuring in his sleep low guttural syllables that no one could place in any known language. At precisely 3:00 a.m., every candle in the room extinguished at once. The darkness was total. There was a moment of disoriented panic as men fumbled for matches. When the lights returned, Edward was no longer in his bed. He lay face down on the floor, arms outstretched, his face frozen in that now infamous mask of terror. The physicians were speechless. Their meticulous records and presence had changed nothing. For Charles, the night was shattering. His reliance on reason had been met with an implacable reality that obeyed no natural law. In the months that followed, he suffered a breakdown, retreating to an asylum where attendants often heard him whisper about the collector of children and the debt that must be paid. The collector of children. Charles's cryptic phrase, the collector of children, entered the private lexicon of the Corbyn family after his death. It appeared in letters, marginal notes, and private diaries, always referring to the same pattern of deaths. The words suggested something more deliberate than a curse, something transactional. Within the family, the term carried both dread and a strange precision. It implied that there was an intelligence behind the killings, an entity that did not strike at random but followed a strict schedule and specific rules. This notion unsettled even the most devoutly religious members of the family, for it did not fit neatly into the categories of demon angel or ghost. The collector was described as patient, exacting, and above all, inevitable. Over time, the family began to talk about the curse, less in terms of if and more in terms of when. Parents of firstborn children measured their lives in the years, months, and days until the child's 7th birthday. Protective measures, locks, guards, blessings were undertaken, but with a sense of going through the motions rather than genuine hope. The idea of the collector cemented the Corbyn curse as something beyond superstition. It was a role, a function, a task carried out without malice but with ruthless constancy, like a tax collector making his appointed rounds. Firstborns sent away. The futile escape. As the 19th century dawned, some branches of the Corbyn family began experimenting with more extreme measures. Several decided not to have children at all, allowing their line to die out. Others sent their firstborn far from the manor, hoping that distance might break the curse's grip. The most striking case occurred in 1821 when Eleanor Corbin sent her daughter, Alice, to a boarding school in Switzerland at the age of 6. Eleanor remained in England, convinced that the Alps themselves would serve as a wall against whatever stalked their bloodline. For a year, she received cheerful letters from her daughter, full of descriptions of mountain air, snow-capped peaks, and new friends. On the morning after Alice's 7th birthday, Eleanor received a telegram. Alice had been found in her dormitory, face down on the floor, arms outstretched, her expression identical to that of the Corbyn children before her. The Swiss authorities listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest. The staff at the school reported no disturbances during the night. This was not an isolated case. Whether the child was in France, America, or Australia, the curse followed. By mid-century, the family had accepted a grim truth: no distance, no name change. No concealment could protect a firstborn. The collector always knew where to find them. The death of Victoria. Corbyn, 1856. James Corbyn, a man known for his temper and stubborn pride, took the avoidance measures further than most. He legally changed his surname, relocated to a remote estate in Scotland, and raised his daughter, Victoria, under an entirely fabricated family history. For years, it seemed as though he had succeeded. Victoria grew into a bright, healthy child, her 7th birthday approaching without incident until the night it arrived. Despite the distance from Northumberland and the secrecy surrounding her heritage, Victoria was found the next morning in the same position as all the others. James's grief was volcanic. Unlike his more cautious ancestors, he decided to confront the curse head-on. Returning to Corbin Manor, he set fire to the east wing, targeting the old library where Thomas Corbyn had stored his most obscure and dangerous acquisitions. Most of the collection was destroyed in the blaze, but James salvaged one crucial artifact before the flames consumed it: Thomas's journal from his time in India. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but what they revealed would be the closest the family had ever come to understanding the origins of their curse. Thomas's journal, the black figurine. The journal recounted Thomas Corbyn's travels in the mountains north of Kolkata, where he had encountered a secluded temple. There, a holy man showed him a relic, an ancient figurine carved from black stone depicting a childlike body with the face of something impossibly old. The holy man warned Thomas never to remove it, explaining that it was a vessel for a being that fed on the essence of innocence, specifically the potential futures of young lives. Thomas dismissed the warning as superstition. Under cover of night, he took the figurine. The journal entries following this theft grew increasingly erratic. Thomas described vivid dreams in which the figurine spoke to him, promising wealth and prosperity in exchange for the smallest of tributes. At first, he wrote these off as guilt, but later passages suggested he came to believe he had made a bargain with full awareness of what it would cost. The final entry, written shortly after Jonathan's death, read, "I have damned not only my soul, but the souls of all who shall come after me. The collector has marked us. The debt shall be paid through generations, and I am powerless to stop it." This was the first documented link between the Corbyn curse and a tangible object, the black figurine. Whether it had been destroyed in the 1856 fire or still lay hidden somewhere within the manor remained a question the family would never stop asking. The Séance of Helena Blavatsky, 1887. In 1887, the Corbyn family invited one of the most renowned spiritualists of the Victorian era, Helena Blavatsky, to Corbin Manor. Blavatsky, famous for her claimed ability to commune with otherworldly entities, had been traveling through England offering her services to aristocratic families haunted by unexplained phenomena. Frederick Corbyn, having recently lost his firstborn son Alfred to the curse, saw her as a last desperate hope. Blavatsky's séance took place in the East Wing, in a room stripped of its usual furnishings and illuminated only by candles. The air was heavy, the shadows seeming to cling to the walls. Witnesses included Frederick, his wife, and two trusted friends. The medium began by calling upon any spirit tied to this family's misfortunes to make itself known. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the temperature plummeted. The flames flickered violently, bending toward a corner of the room where darkness thickened like a living thing. Blavatsky's breathing slowed. Her head tilted back, and she began to speak in a voice that did not belong to her. It was deeper, layered, almost resonant in a way that vibrated in the chest of every listener. She later described this as a consciousness of immense age and alien nature. The entity did not claim to be a ghost, but something older, something that had existed before man learned to stand. Most disturbingly, it spoke in a language Frederick recognized from the weeks before Alfred's death, the same guttural ancient syllables his son had whispered in his sleep. When the séance ended, Blavatsky refused to conduct another. She warned Frederick to abandon the manor, immediately claiming that the entity was tied not only to the Corbyn bloodline, but to the very land beneath the house. In her later writings, she referred to Corbin Manor as a wound in the fabric of reality through which something hungry peers into our world. The entity bound to the land. Blavatsky's warning left a deep impression on Frederick. He relocated his remaining family to London and later to Boston, hoping to outrun the reach of whatever haunted them. But the curse followed. In 1895, his second son, born in America, died on his 7th birthday in the same position and with the same expression of terror. The distance had made no difference. This case reinforced one of the most chilling aspects of the Corbyn curse. While the entity might be anchored to the manor, it was not confined to it. Blood was the true tether. Wherever the Corbyns went, the collector followed. And yet the manor remained a focal point, a place where the air grew unnaturally cold and whispers slithered through the silence at night. Those who spent time there spoke of a constant low-level unease of being watched from corners where nothing stood. Visitors often reported sudden headaches, blurred vision, or a faint ringing in the ears. Animals refused to cross the threshold. The land itself seemed complicit, as if it too recognized the debt and aided in its collection. The belief that the curse was tied to the soil as much as to the family bloodline would influence later theories, and eventually the search for answers would circle back to the ancient temple in India, where Thomas Corbin first took the figurine. Catherine Corbin's monitored death, 1913. The early 20th century brought with it advances in medicine and technology, and some members of the Corbin family hoped these might finally provide protection, or at least answers. In 1913, Peter Corbin, a respected surgeon in Edinburgh, approached his daughter Catherine's 7th birthday with meticulous planning. She was placed in a hospital under constant observation. Electrocardiographs and respiratory monitors, the latest equipment available, were connected to her bedside. A team of nurses and fellow physicians kept vigil through the night. For hours, Catherine slept peacefully, her vital signs steady. Then, at 2:45 a.m., the room's temperature plunged. Ice crystals formed on the surface of a water glass by her bed. At 2:57 a.m., all electrical equipment failed simultaneously. Emergency lights came on 3 minutes later, revealing Catherine lying face down on the floor, arms outstretched, her face frozen in terror. The medical records noted no detectable cause of death. Her heart showed no defects, her lungs no trauma. Peter published his findings in a medical journal under a pseudonym, describing the phenomenon as death by fear, so profound that it arrests the heart without physical injury. Yet privately he admitted to family members that he believed something had entered the room that night, something the instruments could not measure. Death in the Blitz. 1942. During the London Blitz, the city was a place of chaos and death. Yet even amid the horrors of war, the Corbin curse retained its precision. In 1942, Thomas Corbyn, a young father, sought shelter with his wife and 7-year-old son in an underground bunker during an air raid. Dozens of people were packed into the dim space, huddled on benches and the floor. When dawn came and the all-clear sounded, the shelter emptied until someone noticed a small form lying a few feet from where the boy's parents had been sleeping. The child was face down, arms outstretched, his expression the same as every Corbin victim before him. The room had been crowded all night, yet no one had seen him move from between his parents to the cold concrete floor. The war brought so much indiscriminate death that the boy's passing was folded into the larger tragedy. But for the Corbins, it was a brutal reminder. Bombs could fall, buildings could burn, but the curse remained indifferent. It was as precise in a bunker under siege as it had been in a candlelit bedroom centuries before. James Corbin and the Death Imprinting Theory. 1967. In 1967, James Corbin, a professor of anthropology at Cambridge, attempted to frame the curse in academic terms. Rejecting supernatural explanations, he proposed a concept he called familial death, imprinting the idea that a psychological expectation of death reinforced over generations could manifest physically, even fatally. Determined to test this theory, James placed his son Robert in a medically induced coma for the entirety of his 7th birthday. Monitored in a London hospital, Robert was hooked to advanced life support and observation systems. James believed that by removing consciousness, he could break the cycle. But at 3:03 a.m., Robert's eyes opened wide and alert, though the machines confirmed he was still in a coma. He began whispering in a voice far deeper than a child's. The temperature plunged. Several monitors shorted out. When the backup systems came online moments later, Robert was found face down on the floor, arms outstretched, lifeless. 3 days later, James took his own life, leaving behind a note that read only, "It is real. The adoption that failed." New Zealand, 1990. In 1983, Michael and Sarah Corbin decided on a plan they believed could finally outwit the curse. Immediately after the birth of their first child, a boy named David, they arranged for him to be adopted by a family in New Zealand. The adoption was handled through private channels, and the adoptive parents, the Marshalls, were never told of the child's biological heritage. The Corbyns changed their own surname, moved to Canada, and lived in quiet hope that distance, ignorance, and legal severance would finally sever the collector's hold. For 7 years, nothing happened. David Marshall, grew up in Auckland, unaware of any connection to England, the Corbyn family, or their cursed history. He was a bright, energetic child, popular at school, loved deeply by his adoptive parents. His 7th birthday came in the middle of the New Zealand winter. The family celebrated with a modest gathering at home. David going to bed early after a long day of games and cake. The next morning he was found on the floor of his bedroom, face down, arms outstretched, his features frozen in that same impossible terror. The police ruled the death as sudden, unexplained death in childhood SUDC. The Marshalls were devastated and mystified. To them it was an inexplicable tragedy. To the Corbyns it was a confirmation of their worst fear. The curse could not be fooled by adoption, name changes, or continents. The incident left the family with a chilling certainty. Blood, not name or circumstance, was the link. The collector always knew. The Family Council of 1998. By the late 1990s, the surviving branches of the Corbyn family were spread across England, Scotland, Canada, and the United States. In 1998, they convened at Corbin Manor for what they called the Family Council. It was the first time in over a century that so many Corbyn descendants had gathered in one place. Their goal was to consolidate records, medical reports, death certificates, personal diaries, photographs, in hopes of finding a pattern that might lead to a solution. The atmosphere inside the manor was tense. The participants brought boxes of documents, some of them brittle with age. Others arrived with computers loaded with digitized archives. The discussions ranged from heated arguments over superstition versus science to quiet, grief-filled recountings of personal loss. Among the attendees was Dr. Elizabeth Corbin, a geneticist. Her research had found no obvious heart defects or known genetic markers for sudden cardiac death in the family. However, she had discovered a distinctive unidentified genetic sequence present in every Corbyn descendant she tested. When she cross-referenced it against global genetic databases, partial matches emerged in samples taken from ancient burial sites in northern India, the same region where Thomas Corbyn had acquired the black figurine in 1677. This revelation hinted at a link not just of bloodline, but of something older, perhaps older than the Corbyns themselves. Richard Thorne's lunar connection. Another council participant, historian Richard Thorne, born Richard Corbin before changing his name at 18, had combed through centuries of family death records. He discovered an overlooked detail. The deaths always occurred on the night of the child's 7th birthday, if that birthday fell within 3 days of a new moon. If the birthday fell outside that window, the death would still happen, but it would shift to the night nearest the birthday that coincided with a new moon. This was the first documented astronomical pattern tied to the curse. The findings sparked debate. Was the new moon simply a symbolic date for the entity, a moment of darkness to mask its approach? Or did it represent an actual cosmological alignment, something in the absence of lunar light that allowed it to cross into the physical world? The discovery did not bring comfort. Instead, it gave the curse an even greater sense of inevitability. The new moon became a mark on the calendar that every Corbyn parent came to dread. Clara Corbyn's search for the temple. The most compelling presentation at the council came from Clara Corbin, an elderly woman who had lost her son Andrew in 1965. Clara had devoted her life to understanding the curse. In the 1970s, she traveled repeatedly to India in search of the temple described in Thomas's journal. It took her years, but she eventually found its ruins high in the Himalayan foothills. Local villagers spoke of the site in fearful tones. The temple, they said, had once been dedicated to a being they called the Collector of Potential, an entity that fed not on the living flesh, but on the futures that a young human could still grow into. Children of 7 were the perfect prey. Their personalities formed enough to define them, yet still rich with limitless potential. Inside the ruins, Clara found an inner chamber carved with images so specific they sent chills down her spine, children lying face down, arms outstretched, just as the Corbyn victims had been found for centuries. She became convinced that the black figurine Thomas had taken had not just represented the entity, but contained a portion of its essence. Removing it had broken ancient wards, giving the being direct access to the Corbyn bloodline. The ritual of severance. Clara's travels had exposed her to numerous protective practices from different cultures, and she used these to design a ritual she believed might sever the family's connection to the collector. The ritual combined elements from Hindu, Buddhist, and Christian traditions, timed to align with both the new moon and the sunrise. On the night of the ritual, Corbyns from around the world gathered in the great hall of the manor. They formed a circle around a central altar bearing the salvaged remnants of Thomas's occult library, photographs of the lost children, and offerings meant to symbolize the return of potential stolen from the bloodline. Candles burned in every corner of the room, and chanting filled the air. From sunset to sunrise, the ritual continued. At dawn, there was a moment of hushed relief. 2 firstborn Corbyn children passed their 7th birthdays without incident in 1999 and 2000. For the first time in living memory, it seemed the curse had been broken. But in 2003, the death of Emily Corbyn shattered that hope. She died in the same manner as all the others, despite her parents' meticulous adherence to Clara's protective measures. The ritual had not severed the connection, it had only delayed the collector's return. Modern scientific findings, patterns in the brain. In the years following the failed severance ritual, members of the Corbyn family began turning increasingly to modern science for answers. By the 2010s, advances in neuroimaging provided tools the family's ancestors could never have imagined. MRI scans and EEG tests were performed on firstborn Corbyn children in the weeks leading up to their 7th birthdays. What they found was disturbing. In every case, the children's brains exhibited unusual electrical activity during deep sleep, specifically in regions linked to language processing and memory retrieval. The patterns did not match those of normal dreaming. Instead, the readings suggested active conversation with an external source. The activity spiked between 2:45 and 3:00 a.m., eerily consistent with the recorded times of death over the centuries. Several children also reported recurring dreams in which they met the old child, a figure appearing roughly their own age, but with eyes that were ancient, heavy, and hungry. The descriptions of this figure were strikingly similar, despite the children having no contact with one another. Some drew pictures which matched across continents and decades with unsettling precision. These scientific findings provided no cure, but they gave researchers something the family had long lacked: measurable data. And yet even with this evidence, the same question remained. How does one stop an intelligence that can communicate in dreams and kill without leaving a physical trace? The death of Jack Corbin. Caught on camera for 2017. In 2017, the Corbyns decided to employ an unprecedented level of surveillance. Jack Corbyn, the firstborn son of two medical professionals, was outfitted with a sophisticated monitoring system in his bedroom. Infrared cameras, temperature sensors, and multiple microphones were set up to capture any anomaly during the night of his 7th birthday. The footage from that night is chilling. Beginning at midnight, the room's temperature dropped steadily despite the heating system functioning normally. At 2:45 a.m., a shadow appeared in the far corner. It did not match Jack's or any furniture in the room, and it moved independently of the lighting. Over the next several minutes, Jack stirred, but did not wake. At 2:58, he sat upright in bed, his lips moving as if speaking, though the audio recorded only static. At exactly 3:00 a.m., the video feed glitched for 15 seconds. When it returned, Jack was lying face down on the floor, arms outstretched, motionless. The timestamp confirmed the entire event had taken less than a quarter of a minute. The footage was analyzed by video technicians, paranormal researchers, and forensic specialists. None could explain the shadow, the interference, or how Jack had moved to the floor without visible motion. The most unnerving conclusion came from one researcher. We are not seeing the entity itself. We are seeing its effect on our reality, like a shadow cast by something moving in a dimension we cannot perceive. The Twin Experiment 2022. In 2020, Rachel Corbyn and her husband Paul Winters welcomed twins Lily and Michael. Lily, born 8 minutes before her brother, was technically the firstborn, but some in the family theorized that the presence of twins might confuse the entity's focus. To strengthen the deception, they kept Lily's birth order secret from everyone, including the children themselves. Birth certificates were falsified, listing Michael as the elder. By 2022, as their 7th birthday approached, the family prepared for the ultimate test. Both children slept in separate rooms, each monitored by medical professionals, paranormal researchers, and multiple cameras. At 2:45 a.m., sensors in both rooms recorded a simultaneous drop in temperature. At 2:58, both children sat upright and appeared to engage in one-sided conversations, speaking to empty air. At 3:00 a.m., both monitoring systems flickered. When they came back online 12 seconds later, Michael was still asleep in his bed. Lily lay face down on the floor, arms outstretched, dead. The deception had failed. The entity had known all along. The result was devastating for the family and conclusive for researchers. The collector could not be tricked by human ignorance. Birth order was not a matter of paperwork. It was written into something deeper, perhaps in the blood itself. The entity's selective awareness. The twin experiment forced a reconsideration of what the entity actually is and how it perceives its victims. It had ignored Michael entirely, focusing solely on Lily, despite the elaborate deception. This suggested that its awareness was not passive, but active and selective, capable of identifying the true firstborn even when every human involved was convinced otherwise. Researchers began to theorize that the entity marks its target at birth, imprinting on the moment the child first draws breath. This imprint might be tied to biological signals invisible to human senses, perhaps something at the intersection of genetics, quantum states, and consciousness itself. This also raised unsettling implications. If the entity is this precise in identifying its prey. Could it adapt further? Could it one day decide to change the rules, targeting not only firstborns, but others in the bloodline? The thought left many Corbyns sleepless. For centuries they had lived under a fixed set of grim rules. If those rules were mutable, then their only constant, the predictability of the curse, would be gone. The inescapable pattern. By 2023, the Corbyns had accepted an unbearable truth. The curse was not only real, but it operated with an intelligence far beyond their reach. Every method had been tried: distance adoption, deception, medical sedation, constant surveillance, religious rites, and even cross-cultural spiritual rituals. None had worked. The entity could not be outrun. It could not be hidden from, it could not be deceived, and it could not be physically fought, for it left no trace of its presence except in the bodies it claimed. The family's historical records, now digitized and stored across multiple secure servers, read like a death ledger stretching back over 3 centuries. Each entry is hauntingly similar: a date, a name, an age, 7 years exactly, and the same description of the body's position. Generations have been born, lived in fear, and died in the same terrible way, their potential futures stolen at the exact moment they held the most possibility. The Corbyns now live with a collective resignation. The only question left is not if the collector will come, but when and whether modern science can possibly move fast enough to meet it. Dr. Meredith Kline and the quantum predation theory. In 2023, the Corbin case attracted the attention of Dr. Meredith Kline, a quantum physicist whose career had already placed her on the fringes of mainstream science. Kline specialized in theoretical intersections between consciousness and quantum mechanics territory that made many of her peers uneasy. After reviewing the Corbin records, she proposed what she called the quantum predation hypothesis. According to Kline, the entity described in Thomas Corbin's journal might not be supernatural in the traditional sense, but a type of consciousness that exists primarily in quantum states. In this framework, human beings, particularly children, represent nodes of vast unrealized potential futures. By the age of 7, a child is a concentrated nexus of possibilities, still malleable enough that their life could branch into countless directions. Kline theorized that the collector feeds on the collapse of those possibilities into a single outcome: death. The precision of the curse, the exact timing, the unchanging posture of the bodies was to Kline evidence of an interaction not bound by normal space-time rules. She suggested the entity might access the Corbin bloodline through a quantum anchor, possibly tied to the mysterious genetic sequence Dr. Elizabeth Corbin had identified in 1998. The new moon connection, she believed, could represent a natural cosmological condition that made this predation easier. Her proposal was bold, even absurd to some. If the entity operated through quantum channels, perhaps it could be blocked by creating a quantum shield, isolating the child's potential futures from the entity's influence. It was an untested idea, but for a family that had exhausted all other avenues, it was worth consideration. Planning the Quantum Shield Experiment 2024. 3 Corbin descendants were approaching their 7th birthdays in 2024. After extensive discussions, one branch of the family volunteered to work with Dr. Klein to test her quantum shield. The shield would be a complex setup combining Faraday cage principles, superconducting materials, and controlled electromagnetic fields to attempt to decohere the child's quantum state from whatever the entity might be using to access it. The chosen subject was William Corbyn, a bright boy living in Toronto. His parents had already subjected him to years of protective measures, traditional blessings, constant medical checkups, and restrictions on travel. Now they agreed to Dr. Klein's more radical approach. The plan was to conduct the experiment on October 31st, William's 7th birthday, which coincided with both a new moon and Halloween. Preparations began months in advance. Equipment was sourced from multiple countries to avoid scrutiny. The experimental room would be surrounded by layered shielding monitored by high-speed cameras and quantum sensors. Paranormal researchers, physicists, and medical staff would all be on hand. For the first time in years, there was genuine anticipation in the Corbin family, and almost fragile hope that maybe the pattern could be broken. The entity's adaptation, William's early death. That hope ended abruptly on February 3, 2024, 8 months before the scheduled experiment. William was found dead in his bedroom, face down, arms outstretched, the same expression of terror as every victim before him. The date did not match his birthday, but it did coincide with the new moon closest to the 7th anniversary of a serious illness he had suffered as an infant. At 2 months old, William had contracted pneumonia and been clinically dead for 3 minutes before being revived. Dr. Klein's analysis was chilling. The entity had adapted. It had chosen to align its collection not with the child's birth date, but with the anniversary of the moment it considered the child's true beginning, in potential his return from clinical death. This marked the first documented shift in the curse's timetable in over 3 centuries. If the collector could change its own rules, then all previous predictive models based on lunar phases and birthdays were now unreliable. The family's already thin margin for planning had vanished. The black figurine and the manor's hidden depths. With the timeline destabilized, some Corbyn relatives returned focus to the object at the heart of the curse. The black figurine Thomas had taken from the Himalayan temple. If it had been destroyed in the 1856 fire, perhaps the entity's connection could be severed. But if it still existed hidden somewhere on the estate, it might explain why the curse had never lost strength. Richard Corbyn, current owner of the largely abandoned manor, allowed a small team of researchers access to the property in late 2021. Using ground-penetrating radar, they discovered anomalies beneath the Eastern Foundation's voids that did not match any known architectural plans. Some of these spaces appeared to predate the construction of Corbin Manor itself. Excavation permits were requested, but local heritage authorities delayed approval, citing the site's historical significance. In the meantime, those who had been inside the manor reported strange mobile cold spots, the persistent sensation of being watched, and faint whispers in an unrecognizable language. Whether the figurine lay in those hidden spaces remained unknown, but the possibility kept the manor at the center of the family's fears. The dual strategies moving forward. By late 2024, the Corbyn family was split on how to proceed. One faction supported Dr. Klein's continued research into quantum shielding, believing that with refined methods and faster deployment, they might still save future children. Another faction favored returning to spiritual and ritual approaches, combining protections from multiple faiths in the hope that a concentrated assault of belief might repel the collector. A third, more radical group proposed demolishing Corbin Manor, entirely arguing that if the figurine or any other anchor remained hidden in its walls, destroying the structure might sever the connection. Others feared that such an act could release whatever containment still existed, unleashing the entity beyond the bloodline. The curse, as it had for centuries, thrived on uncertainty. The family's unity was fractured. Resources were divided. And as the next set of Corbin children approached their 7th birthdays, the collector's hunger remained undiminished, its precision now coupled with an unsettling adaptability. Philosophical implications. Fate versus free will. As the years have worn on, the Corbin curse has become more than a family tragedy. It has turned into a philosophical wound. For centuries, humanity has clung to the belief that free will governs our lives, that our choices matter, and that no outcome is preordained. Yet here stands the Corbin bloodline, proof to them and perhaps to the world that there are forces which operate outside human choice, enforcing patterns that cannot be broken by intent, intelligence, or desperation. In whispered conversations over candlelit tables surviving, Corbyn speak of the existential weight of knowing the clock begins ticking the moment a firstborn arrives. Parents watch their child's 6th birthday, not with joy, but with the creeping terror of a countdown entering its final year. The knowledge reshapes lives, dictating who marries, who has children, and who refuses to bring new life into the world. In this way, the curse perpetuates itself not only through death, but through the living's surrender to inevitability. The most unsettling question, one that scholars, priests, and physicists alike have asked, is whether the curse is unique to the Corbins, or whether similar patterns lie hidden in other bloodlines unnoticed because they do not leave such a meticulously documented trail. If fate can bind one family so tightly, might it weave invisible chains around countless others, their debts paid in ways we fail to recognize? The gene editing proposal. In 2025, a team of geneticists working with the family put forward the most controversial solution yet targeted gene editing. Building on Dr. Elizabeth Corbin's 1998 discovery of the distinctive genetic sequence in all Corbin descendants, they proposed using CRISPR technology to remove or alter that section of DNA in embryos before implantation. The theory was that if this sequence acted as the anchor by which the entity found its prey, erasing or modifying, it might sever the connection entirely. Supporters saw it as the first truly proactive step in centuries, a way to break the curse at its biological root. Opponents feared the unknown consequences of tampering with a human genome in such a targeted way. Could removing the sequence inadvertently damage other essential functions? And even if successful, would it free only future generations, leaving living children vulnerable? Ethical debates raged within the family. Some saw the gene editing plan as salvation, others viewed it as a dangerous gamble akin to cutting the wrong wire in an unseen bomb. For now, the proposal remains untested, its promise, and peril balanced on the edge of science's most delicate frontier, or lack thereof. As of today, there is no unified plan. The Corbin family remains divided across 3 main strategies: those who put their faith in quantum shielding, those who cling to multi-faith ritual protections, and those who champion genetic editing. Each group believes their path is the only viable escape, and each accuses the others of wasting precious time. The result is paralysis. Without a singular course of action, resources are split, research is duplicated, and potential breakthroughs are delayed. Meanwhile, the collector remains active, adapting as needed, its hunger unbroken. The family's records now span more than 346 years, each entry a mark in a grim ledger. These records, kept hidden from the public to avoid exploitation, show the pattern with a clarity that is almost cruel, an unbroken chain of firstborns dead at 7, their bodies arranged like ritual offerings. For the Corbyns, the only certainty is that time is not on their side. Every moment of disagreement is another moment in which the collector moves closer to its next appointed visit, the shadow that remains. The story of the Corbin curse is in one sense a family history. In another, it is a warning. It reminds us that there are forces in our world that do not fit neatly into the categories of science or superstition, forces that can trace a line through generations with perfect precision, indifferent to our defenses, and unmoved by our understanding. Corbin Manor still stands in Northumberland, its windows dark, its halls mostly empty. Locals cross themselves when they pass its gates. Inside, the air feels wrong cold in ways no weather can explain, thick with a silence that seems to listen. Somewhere beneath its eastern wing lie spaces no blueprint records, possibly holding the black figurine that started it all. Perhaps it waits there, still inert, but aware, patient in the way only something outside time can be. The Corbyns continue their fractured search for salvation, knowing the collector's debt remains unpaid. Some debts once incurred cannot be escaped, only endured generation after generation, like a shadow that falls the same way no matter how you move. And so the ledger grows, the pattern holds. The whispers in an ancient tongue still curl through the dark on moonless nights. And in some quiet corner of reality, the collector waits for the next firstborn to draw their 7th breath on the appointed night, ready to take what was promised centuries ago. The Ghastly Journal closes this account as it began, with more questions than answers, and with the uneasy certainty that this is not merely a ghost story. It is a wound in the world, and it is still bleeding. Every new approach carries the same underlying risk that in attempting to fight the curse, they may inadvertently strengthen its hold. Final reflection. A debt without end. The Corbin curse remains unbroken after more than 346 years. It has survived the rise and fall of empires, the spread of modern science, and every conceivable act of resistance. From Thomas Corbyn's fateful theft in 1677 to the premature death of William in 2024, it has claimed dozens of firstborn children, each taken with the same precision, the same posture, the same look of frozen terror. The black figurine that began it all may lie buried beneath rubble, hidden within the manor's decaying walls, or lost forever, but its influence endures. To this day, the eastern foundation of Corbin Manor emits cold spots and faint whispers on moonless nights, as if the house itself remembers the dead. Whether the entity is an ancient demon, a quantum predator, or something beyond any category we possess, one truth is inescapable. It will not release its claim willingly. Until the anchor is broken through destruction, return, or some yet unimagined intervention, the Corbin family will live in the shadow of an inherited fate. And for every firstborn brought into the world, the ticking of the unseen clock begins anew, counting down to a night when all roads close to one door and the collector comes to take tomorrow away.